Okay, you know that super awkward moment when you're at the club and you realize you're way more into the situation than the other person is?
Yeah. Talk about a recipe for a night you won't forget.
Right. And that's exactly what we're diving into today.
Oh, lay it on me.
A Reddit post from, get this, yourself, the title. I made out with a girl at a club, now I regret it. We'll be dissecting the whole thing, all the social dynamics, the advice, even some pretty unexpected relationship stuff that came out of the comments.
Clubbing is like this weird microcosm of social behavior, right?
Oh, so our original poster, or OP, he ends up in a bit of a pickle, meets a girl at the club, things escalate to making out.
Okay, sounds familiar.
And then he spends the rest of the night dodging her.
Oh, the classic instant regret scenario. Seems pretty straightforward at first glance, but I bet there's more to unpack, especially in a club environment. What do you think? Just buyer's remorse? Or is there something deeper going on?
I'm thinking it's got to be more than just that. Because the OP mentions telling the girl he wasn't interested anymore.
Which brings us to the whole consent and boundaries thing. Giving them, receiving them. So essential.
Absolutely. And it gets interesting because it sounds like he struggled with just saying no directly.
Yeah, why do you think that is? Why is it so hard sometimes to just set a firm boundary when things get heated? Especially in that kind of setting.
Well, I think the club atmosphere itself plays a role. The music, the lights, it's all so intense. Sensory overload,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
It's got to be tougher to think straight and just react decisively.
That's a really good point. The whole environment is kind of set up to lower those inhibitions. And of course, then you add alcohol to the mix. But even without it, there's this pressure to let loose, do things you wouldn't normally do.
Exactly. Step outside your comfort zone, as they say. But then, on top of all that, there's the whole issue of social expectations. Like, how does the fact that this is happening at a club, how does that change how we approach these interactions?
That's when it gets really interesting. Because there's this unspoken understanding that what happens at the club stays at the club. It's fleeting, less serious. Maybe that's why some people on Reddit were like, get over it, dude. It's just a club.
Right. But that, to me, highlights the disconnect between those broader social expectations and what someone's actually experiencing in the moment.
Fascinating how something so seemingly simple can reveal so much. It's like this clash between individual wants and societal norms, all amplified by the environment.
Absolutely. And speaking of revealing, we can't forget about the Reddit comments.
Oh, Reddit, the gift that keeps on giving. What do they have to say?
Seriously, it was a wild ride. Some people gave genuine advice. Some people were just savage. Like, one person suggested the OP should brag about his Reddit karma as his greatest achievement to totally turn her off. Brutal!
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. But jokes aside, was there any consistent advice people were giving? Any themes?
Oh yeah, definitely. Clear communication was a big one. Respecting boundaries. And this idea that you're not obligated just because there's some initial interest or because of alcohol, like those were the pillars.
It's nice to see, even in a casual setting like a club, those principles still matter.
Yeah, I agree. It's easy to forget that sometimes, right? Get caught up in the moment and think different rules apply. But respect and communication, they're universal.
They really are. And it's actually pretty refreshing to see that reflected in the advice from, well, internet strangers.
Totally. Like, it shows a shared understanding that even in the chaos of a club, we still want clear boundaries and respect. But it's not always that simple, is it? I mean, remember how the OP wasn't just bothered by the girl, but by her friends too?
Oh, yeah, that whole wingman dynamic, or wingwoman, I guess.
Yeah.
It adds another layer of complexity to the whole thing.
It does. He mentions her friend, pulling him aside, saying the girl was looking for something serious. Then they try to get him to drink more. Like, there's this element of social pressure, maybe even a little orchestration going on.
It makes you wonder about their intentions, right? Were they genuinely trying to be good friends, or is there something else at play?
Who knows? But it definitely shows how social dynamics, especially in groups, can influence us without us even realizing it.
For sure. There's this shared energy, maybe even a bit of a mob mentality sometimes. And then you throw alcohol into that mix, fuels the fire, amplifies those social pressures, makes it even harder to think straight and act according to your own boundaries.
Which brings us to something a lot of the Reddit advice emphasized, being assertive and direct when setting those boundaries.
Makes sense. You got to use that clear, unambiguous language so there's no room for misinterpretation. Got to know what you're okay with, what you're not okay with, and communicate that.
Some people were even suggesting specific phrases like, I'm not feeling this anymore, or I need some space. Simple, but effective, right?
Absolutely. It's about being assertive, but also respectful. You don't have to be rude, but you do have to be firm. But I get why that can be hard, especially for younger people who are still figuring out those social
Oh,
dynamics.
for sure. There's this fear of hurting someone's feelings or coming off as mean.
Absolutely. We're taught to be polite, accommodating, and when there's a power dynamic, like in this case where the girl was clearly more forward, it can be intimidating to push back, especially with alcohol involved.
So true. It's like, how do you navigate that?
Well, the key is remembering your comfort and safety come first. You always have the right to say no, no matter what, even if you were initially interested.
And, it's not just about saying no yourself, but also recognizing when someone else is saying no to you, even if they don't actually say the word.
You got it. It's about picking up on those nonverbal cues,
Yeah.
body language, their energy, things like that. If they seem uncomfortable, that's your signal.
Yeah, like a silent conversation almost. It's about being tuned in to yourself and to the other person and being willing to adjust based on what you're sensing.
Perfectly said. It's this ongoing dance of communication and consent, making sure everyone involved feels safe and respected.
I think that's a great point to pause for a second. We've covered a lot. From that initial awkward encounter to the deeper social dynamics, the importance of open communication.
Before we go any further, we'd love to hear from you. What are your thoughts on all this? Have you ever been in a similar situation? Head over to Shauna Pelage on YouTube and tell us about it in the comments.
Yeah, and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next part, where we'll dive even deeper into navigating consent, boundaries, and those club expectations. We'll be right back.
Welcome back. We're still untangling this Reddit post about club regret and all the social stuff that comes with it.
Right, and before we jumped off, we were in the middle of talking about that wingman thing and how it can just ramp up the pressure to, like, cross boundaries.
Yeah, it's like clubs are almost designed to push those expectations, right? The
Yeah.
music, the lights, the alcohol, it all creates this pressure cooker.
Exactly. But amidst all that chaos, the story actually takes a pretty surprising turn.
Oh, really? Tell me, what happened?
So even with all that initial awkwardness, and miscommunication, they actually end up having a conversation about the whole thing. And get this, it went well.
Wow, that's a relief. I was expecting some major drama. What did they talk about?
They both kind of admitted that the alcohol had, blurred the lines, realized they weren't on the same page, and just decided to move on without any hard feelings.
That's great. Mature of them. Goes to show communication, even after things get a little messy, it really can save the day.
Totally. They didn't let that initial awkwardness fester. They cleared the air. Everyone walked away with their dignity intact.
Exactly. It just proves that even in those fleeting, club encounters, honesty and respect, they're still key.
And that we don't always have to have those tough conversations right then and there in the heat of the moment. Sometimes stepping back, reassessing, and communicating later can actually lead to a much better outcome.
So true. It's not always about reacting. It's about choosing how we want to respond. And that can make all the difference.
It really can. And this whole situation, it makes me think about something we haven't touched on yet. The role of alcohol in all of this, in navigating consent and boundaries. I mean, it's kind of obvious that clubs and alcohol, they go hand in hand.
Oh, yeah, the infamous social lubricant, which sometimes makes things way more slippery.
Right. And in this Reddit post, it's clear that alcohol played a big part. It lowered inhibitions and probably made it harder for both of them to really understand what was happening, and to communicate effectively.
It's important to remember how alcohol affects us specifically. Like, it literally dampens activity in the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of our brain responsible for, like, decision-making, impulse control, rational thought.
Oh, wow. So it's not just like a feeling. It's a real physiological thing.
It is. So yeah, alcohol can make us do and say things we wouldn't normally.
Which explains why navigating consent when you're under the influence, it can be so tricky. Especially in a club where the music's loud, the lights are flashing, everyone's already hyped up. It's like alcohol adds another layer of, like, distorted reality.
It's fascinating, isn't it? How this substance can completely change how we see and experience things, how we act.
Totally. And it makes it even more important to be mindful of how much we're drinking and how alcohol might be affecting the people we're interacting with.
For sure. If you see someone who's clearly intoxicated, even if they seem to be initiating something, proceed with caution.
Absolutely. Because their judgment might be impaired, right?
Right.
They might not be able to make informed decisions. It's always better to err on the side of safety and respect.
Which brings us back to clear communication and respecting boundaries, even when it feels awkward or like inconvenient in the moment.
Yeah, because in the end, safety and respect, they trump any social pressures or expectations.
Totally agree. This whole conversation about the OP's experience and the role of alcohol, it's got me thinking. It's almost like clubs are designed to encourage certain behaviors.
Like, you mean how the flashing lights, the music, even just being physically close to other people, it all creates this intense sensory experience, this feeling of letting go, losing your inhibitions.
Exactly, like you're stepping into a different world where the usual rules don't really apply. And for some people, that can be super liberating, exciting even.
But for others, it can be really disorienting, overwhelming. And then add alcohol, it becomes even more complicated.
Which is why it's so important to have these conversations about consent, boundaries, and alcohol, especially in the context of club culture.
Yeah, we need to be equipped to make good decisions, even in environments where the lines can get blurry.
It starts with understanding how alcohol affects our brains, recognizing that potential for social pressure and distorted perceptions, and being able to communicate our boundaries even when we've had a few drinks.
You know what else I think is important? It's not just what we say, but how we say it.
Oh, you're so right. Body language, those nonverbal cues, they're just as important as words. It's about paying attention to those signals, both in yourself and in others.
So like, if someone's pulling away, avoiding eye contact, anything like that, those are red flags. Time to take a step back.
Exactly. And if you're the one feeling uncomfortable, don't hesitate to say something. You always have the right to say no.
And remember, even if you were into it at first, it's totally okay to change your mind.
That's so important. Consent isn't a one-time thing. You can withdraw it at any point.
It's not about saying yes at the beginning and then feeling stuck. It's about checking in with yourself and making sure you're comfortable all along the way.
And that takes being assertive, communicating your needs and limits clearly.
Which I know can be hard, but it's a skill worth practicing. Because ultimately, it's about empowering ourselves and others to have better, safer experiences.
I love that. I think this is a good place to pause. We've gone deep on navigating consent, boundaries, talked about alcohol, and really highlighted how important communication is, both verbal and nonverbal.
Before we get to the last part of this deep dive, we want to hear from you. Have you ever been in a situation where the lines of consent felt blurry? How did you handle it?
Tell us about it. Leave a comment on Shauna Pelage's YouTube channel. We always love to hear your stories and insights.
And don't forget to subscribe to Voices of the Soul so you don't miss the final part where we'll tie everything together and give you some takeaways for dealing with these, tricky social situations. Welcome back to the deep dive. We're wrapping up our exploration of that Reddit post, the one about regret at the club. And wow, we've had some fascinating conversations come out of it.
It really is amazing, isn't it? How one seemingly simple situation can spark such a complex conversation about social dynamics, consent, alcohol, all of it.
Right. And before the break, we're really digging into the importance of clear communication. And not just what we say, but our body language too.
Yeah.
Those nonverbal cues.
And I think it's worth repeating. Those skills, they aren't just for the club. They're essential in any social setting where you're navigating boundaries and expectations.
100%. Parties, concerts, even just hanging out with friends. Being able to communicate your needs and limits, it's so important.
And it goes both ways, right? It's not just about expressing yourself clearly, but also being open to the signals other people are giving off.
Yeah, sometimes people might not actually say no out loud, but their body language, their tone of voice, it might be telling a different story.
Exactly. Those nonverbal cues, they can speak volumes. If someone's pulling away, avoiding eye contact, looking uncomfortable, those are all signs to pay attention to and adjust your behavior accordingly.
It's all about being respectful of their space, their boundaries,
Mm-hmm.
even if they haven't explicitly said anything.
Exactly. And on the flip side, if you're the one feeling uneasy or unsure about something, don't be afraid to speak up. You always have the right to say no for any reason.
That's such a crucial point. We often forget that.
Huh.
But it's also important to be aware of our own nonverbal communication, right? Make sure what we're doing with our body language matches what we're actually feeling and intending.
You're right. It's easy to send mixed messages, especially in places like clubs. There's so much going on, so much stimulation.
It's like sensory overload. So being mindful and intentional with both our words and our actions, it's something we can all work on, whether you're a club regular or just starting to explore that scene.
For sure. Those skills, they're the foundation for healthy relationships and creating positive social experiences.
And you know what else? We need to remember it's okay to make mistakes. We're human. We're all learning as we go.
So true. We all stumble sometimes, but the important thing is to learn from those experiences and try to do better next time.
And that's what I love about the OP's story. Despite that initial awkwardness and miscommunication, they were able to have an open and honest conversation, and they found a resolution that respected both of their feelings.
It gives me hope, even when things get messy, uncomfortable, there's always room for growth and understanding.
I think that's such a powerful message.
It is. It's about approaching these situations with empathy, compassion, a willingness to learn and change.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Regret at the Club, I want to leave you with a few key takeaways.
Go for it.
First, clear communication is everything. Words and body language. Make sure you're expressing your needs and limits and paying attention to the signals the other person is giving.
Number two, consent is ongoing. It can be withdrawn at any time, for any reason. Don't ever feel obligated to do anything that makes you uncomfortable.
Third, remember how much alcohol can impact our judgment and ability to communicate. Be mindful of how much you're drinking and be aware of how alcohol might be affecting the people around you.
And lastly, don't beat yourself up about mistakes. We all make them. What matters is that we learn from them and work towards creating safer, more respectful, enjoyable social experiences for everyone.
Couldn't fit it better myself. If you enjoyed this deep dive, make sure you subscribe to Voices of the Soul for more conversations like this.
And if you have any thoughts or experiences you'd like to share, head over to Shauna Palage on YouTube and leave us a comment. We love hearing from you.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those conversations going.